This is a clouds weather alert.
Good late Thursday, early Friday. Meteorologist Casey Cloud here in the Weather Center right now, giving you a look at those temperatures across the region. I know if you're watching here live, it's about 1:25 in the morning. You see here those 30s predominantly. The story, I know we're right just barely at 30 here east of Stark, almost close to dipping toward 29 in our rural area. It's just because of the situation there, away from concrete, away from the city lights there, just things like that as you're looking and as you're tracking things. When you have those calmer winds of story, you get cooler areas, in those more rural zones. I know we're at 36 of the last check at the Keystone Airport, but as we look ahead toward the weekend, we're going to have wind chill values here that are very, very low, and that means we're going to have more mixing, some more uniform local temperatures, including the beaches, which are going to have a hard freeze. Yeah, the Northeast Florida ones, and that's very unusual. Got to prepare those, pipes there, even at the beaches, they could burst. You got to be prepared for that here as we're looking ahead in the timeline. Even in Central Florida, even in Orlando, you could have a very significant freeze, one of the worst in years. So you got to prepare because otherwise we're going to have all sorts of problems on that Sunday morning with people's pipes bursting. I'm sure that's going to happen anyway, but try to take as many precautions as you can to insulate them, and then also just make sure you're dripping the faucets. I know here east of Stark, we actually got 18, going back not too long ago, a couple weeks ago here, as we were looking and as we were tracking things in my rural area, and that's just because away from the city. Now on Sunday morning, probably about the same temperature, maybe a degree warmer because of the overall mixing going on with so high of winds, getting us down to single digit wind chill temperatures. That's your feel like temperatures, and that's why we have an extreme cold watch in play for Sunday morning. I know it's a situation though where in town Stark we have not gotten this cold in a while, because you're also going to get to about 19 or so, give or take, on that thermometer on that Sunday morning. So you really got to take that into consideration here. Very important as we're watching the overall weather situation here. You just got to really be careful, really mindful. It's going to be, really chilly out there Sunday morning again. There's pipes bursting. You got to protect your pets, your plants, your pipes, people, obviously. And then you have pools. Those could end up, freezing on up on you, things like that, because, getting that, water to freeze there and the like, just a tricky situation as we're looking at things, as we're tracking things. Got to watch out for, fire safety there and practicing that. Gotta watch out for those fires as well, those space heaters that can be, an issue there. Those could flip over things along those lines. You just got to be very, very vigilant here for sure as we're looking and tracking things in the overall weather pattern. I know I'm definitely telling that story. I know we're at 30 degrees here right now. I used to start our rural area. I know yesterday morning we got down to 21 here. Very chilly compared to most folks. The morning before that it was 22. Then we had 22 there the night, before as well, as we were looking there, and then 36 was the low. On Monday it was late in the evening. Sunday it was, we had a storm, so it was very warm. But then you go back in the timeline, of course, and we had that morning there. As you go all the way back on the, it looks like the 16th there, we had 17 and a half on the thermometer, very low humidity values as well that day in the region here. We have that dry air in here. I know it's chapstick type of weather. We've had lower dew points around. Now they're going up a little, and that's something we're watching here, though. They're eventually going to go back down again. We're going to have those just crazy low wind chills coming up. I know right now, if we pull up wind chills, we really don't have much showing up on that. We don't have too much in the way of wind right now, but we're going to have more moisture, and that's actually going to lead to a chance here for some snow. I got into the most important part about the cold now. The snow part generally will be fun. Got to be kind of careful, if you get that surface temperature to 32, though, that can start to become an issue if you get enough accumulation. Most of our area probably won't see that here. There's no alerts for the snow right now in the covered area. We may get a winter weather advisory in our far northeastern counties and southeast Georgia. This time we're about southeast Georgia. Otherwise probably about flurries or light snow showers for the rest of our area, though. I wouldn't be surprised if a winter weather advisory has to get issued down towards the Tampa area. Some of our model guidance is, really showing a situation where instead of lake effect snow like you get up toward like Buffalo, New York, you're gonna have maybe Gulf effect snow. Yeah, I know that sounds crazy. It doesn't really happen, too often at all. But we're gonna have the correct wind direction for that here, so they actually have a better chance of snow around Tampa, maybe just north of Tampa. Maybe mainly just south of our area. Levy and Marion could get into that part of the setup here, but they might actually have a better chance there, like Citrus, Hernando, and some of those counties down that way as we're looking and tracking things here. Just kind of giving you guys the very, latest on everything for sure. So we'll just have to kind of watch and wait for that, Pinellas, Hillsborough, Polk, some of those areas there as we're just looking and as we're tracking things. Definitely just intriguing to kind of see that possibility here potentially come in to play. Maybe some Gulf effect snow Saturday night and early Sunday. So that's going to be a storyline down there. So just giving you guys a heads up as you're looking down toward West Central Florida. That you could actually get, some snowfall down there, which is even more rare than our Southeast Georgia communities getting into that. That is very, very rare to get the correct wind direction for that setup. In fact, let me go ahead and kind of get into some of this here. I'll go ahead and go over some model guidance. Let's see the NAM. I know it's not the most reliable, but I think it's on to something here. I think it's on to something. So we're looking to the north. We have our pattern. It's not going to be perfect by any means, but this is your higher resolution NAM. And just, we'll see the HRRR, which I think is doing a better job in general for our area. You see some stuff on northern fringes there as we're looking on Saturday morning in the afternoon. I think that might be overdone some in our northern fringes on this model here. This actually does bring some snow accent all the way here in the Stark, though, so I like it for that. I have about a 40% chance, give or take, around Stark for that snow flurry accent on Saturday. This is around 5 p.m. according to this model. I think it's overdoing some of this, especially at some of the intensities further up, on our northern periphery a bit. But I think it has the right idea down here for Gulf effect snow. I know that's crazy. Generally it won't be too big of an impact, though. There's a chance. If I was making, I don't have the graphic in here for Tampa area, and somehow guidance, not showing it, some showing, a decent bit. I would say some areas in West Central Florida have a chance for a half inch of snow accumulation here. Not necessarily anywhere in our covered area in Florida. I think it'd be just a dusting at the most, at the very most here, as we're looking and tracking things, probably like a tenth of an inch, Roy, we're talking about with, at a most, at the most there. As we're looking, as we're monitoring things. I know this winter storm is going to produce a lot of snow in the Carolinas. It would seem not the ice storm threat like we had last week. I know Ole Miss having big problems in the wake of that. They're closed for a while because of that. It's just so terrible to hear as we're looking and as we're tracking things, as we're monitoring things here overall. I know I'm just trying to give you guys the very latest here on all of this. I know in terms of a dusting of snow, it's always tricky with the actual, descriptor of that because that's kind of a broad descriptor here. But generally, it's about a tenth or less here as we're looking. So, that's what I'm thinking. If we get it in our North Florida counties, our North Florida zones, anybody up here are going to get a dusting at the most. Probably not even that. For people that just get the flurries in the air, don't get too excited in our North Florida zones. If I'm in West Central Florida, though, I'm about to say this to you. It's crazy. Just throwing that out to you right now. But I would say some areas could get up to a half inch of snow in West Central Florida. Be very isolated, very isolated corridors here. But I think that's on the table with this type of situation. In some areas with the way these bands set up, you started to see that real quick before I skip over this. This isn't our Levy County area, and even Alachua on this here. But in Levy, that's where this focuses. The wind direction was set up for this more so. This up here may happen. It'd be great if it did. That'd be fun and non-impactful here, really, toward our area. But it actually could have, in theory, some impacts here down here in Tampa, because if I progress this, you'll start to see what I'm talking about, because you see a little bit of the white stuff, a lot of green, but then all of a sudden here, we start to see here a lot more of the white show up here, and kind of a training pattern here going on as we're looking and as we're tracking things, as we're giving you guys the very latest here on the overall situation. I know we're talking about areas there maybe in Pasco County, as we're looking at this. That could be a good bit of snowfall, even if it's pretty light. It could hang around a little bit with these winds coming out of the northwest that's bringing it off the Gulf there. You have the Gulf there where I'll see the temperature contrast. You have the warmer Gulf, the cooler land, and just the overall pattern may get that to generate right there in those coastal counties. This is looking pretty likely here. Again, not everybody's going to even get it down there, but some folks that get it, maybe in Pasco County, for instance, could get up to a half inch of snow. A half inch of snow here, folks, maybe in Pasco County, somewhere in and around there, not off the table. That's not a big deal for other areas, but for West Central Florida, that'd be a huge deal, huge deal down there. And the temperatures, let's just say this here, on here is so in right just above freezing. So if we get that to fall and it doesn't really, if it depends on if it falls, if it doesn't really matter, it might still be around in the morning when people are getting up to be able to take pictures in daylight because this is, after dark. So that does limit that fun potential some. But in the morning at sunrise, I'd say when you get in the morning paper, but unfortunately, people don't really do that too much anymore. But when you're getting ready for church, something like that, it might be stuff that's still around there in some of those areas on the ground in West Central Florida. It's a situation here where the roads, if we do get below 32, it could even, in a few spots, if this lingers long enough, could stick to the roads. But we're seeing this here. This is a very aggressive model. I don't know if it'd be this aggressive, but again, we're talking about a 10 p.m. on Saturday as we're looking. That white stuff is snow around Pasco County, around Hillsborough County. You have areas there, just as we're looking there, just an unbelievable situation there, Hernando County. So again, this is not our covered area, but it's remarkable to be looking at the best chance of Florida snow, probably into our south there late Saturday as we're looking. So that's 10 p.m., 11 p.m., more snow. Midnight, still some snow in there. 1 a.m. in Tampa, snow still sun up, even though it's really light. Eventually it would, amount to something there with these type of temperatures. And then you still see the snow around here. I think this is pretty aggressive, but I think the idea is on point here. This is probably going to happen in that Tampa area. Again, 3 a.m., 4 a.m., still snow. I mean, this is still in snow all the way down. This might be too much, but down there, all the way down close to Arcadia, maybe some flurries. But I feel like if you got accumulation, it could happen around Tampa because it's still actually wanting to give it to some folks. It starts to slack off, but around sunrise, this is 7 a.m., still some of that white and gray stuff snowing up on the radar. That is a pretty extended period. It'd be light, but, eventually that could add up to a half inch for somebody if the banding sets up just right because you're doing the equivalence here, a half inch of snow, and sometimes the snow is different. You're talking about only 5/100th of an inch of rain gives you a half inch of snow. So, I don't want to go higher than that, but, if you had that to train like that, then that would give you a good little bit down there. See in North Florida here in our counties, I'll back this up. We're not really seeing that. You're seeing it off the coast, sure, but I'll back this on up. Again, I feel like this is showing, this Florida county. I think go for our area, this is a little too aggressive. I do think there's a chance of a road flurry, though. I have that in my forecast, but in South Georgia, yeah, that's a little much probably on this. But I have a different model I can see, guys. It's the HRRR. I know it is 138, so let me just double check something here with our modeling. I want to just make sure this is the current run in here. Yes, the current extended. I know the next one will be coming out soon. This is how things shift on it. I know there's a chance of rain on this Friday, but that's a similar chance as we have for the snow on Saturday. As we're looking, and rain early on with that precip chance mixed on in. But okay, we have the HRRR model. So let me go ahead and pull this on up here. Just bear with me as we're looking and tracking things. We're going to go ahead and throw this on up. And this is your HRRR, which I think is doing a better job for our area here in general. I do think there'll be a few road flurries. I hope it's, as aggressive as what our NAM higher resolution was showing. But yeah, that was just a look now. I switch back over here. In fact, I'm going to change that so it just loops around for us some, so we don't keep switching back and forth. So let's go ahead and do that. Sally, we're going to go ahead and throw that back up here. And we'll just have this loop around a bunch of, time from, you see all that up there? You see sort of around Jessup, especially just north of our area, really falling. So you see here 10, 11, noon. You see, I know Macon will probably get into the periphery. That's Savannah will definitely get into some snow, maybe, up there. They have a threat for maybe a little bit more in that area. I know there's some winter storm watches up that way. Let me double check to see if they've changed some of that here real quick. I know Charleston got upgraded to a winter storm warning. Is Savannah under the winter storm watch? Okay, they are not, but Statesboro is. Areas there just to the north of Savannah are under that winter storm watch, as the forecast up in that area is for 1 to 4 inches of snow with some heavy snow possible. And areas there, just to the north of the area, again, that title about snow flurries and snow showers possible. That's more our area. We could actually have, heavy snow just north of our covered area, which technically is on this map here a little bit as you're looking up I-95. But as we're looking there, I know areas like Walterboro, going in South Carolina, and some of those further north toward the areas we have Metter, Statesboro. You kind of get the idea. Hilton Head Island, Hampton, South Carolina. That's an area where I stayed when I went to watch the solar eclipse years ago. But as we're looking and as we're tracking, things went further up from there. But as we were looking and tracking things, you can see just looping this over and over again, trying to tell the story again, gray and white, that equals snow. The white would be a little bit heavier-ish. So when I say heavier-ish for our area, when you're looking at this, as you see this, it starts at 10 a.m. and goes to about 7 o'clock or so, as we're looking and as we're tracking things here. So that gray would be mainly just flurries on here. The white would actually be, enough to dust the ground a little bit. As we're looking at, I said in North Florida, probably only 1/10 of an inch of trace dusting here at the most. In southeast Georgia, there's a chance for just a bit more around Brunswick area. They're kind of on the periphery. It's not training as much either. But, as we're tracking things, it's possible you could get up to a 1/2 inch there. That might be a little more aggressive because there's this here, it's not lasting as long. They're like, even if it's, a little bit heavier than what you have down south in theory could, in a very isolated spot, could train and get somebody a 1/2 inch of snow down there in the Tampa area. Around Star Jacksonville and Gainesville, it's something where I think we'll have a chance of flurries. I think it just very well could happen. But, if I really was wanting to see snow, based on all the latest guidance, and there's still a little bit more time for a high-res guidance update, I would want to go a little bit more off toward the north here. So, again, or south, I guess. So that'd be at night. That's, something where you'd kind of have to stay overnight, and then you'd be kind of having to wait to sunrise to, see the ground covered maybe, which would be amazing there for Tampa area. That'd be, one of the bigger Florida stories we've had all decade down there. As we're looking toward the Tampa area, maybe Gulf effect snow. It's not on this, but it's on the other modeling I was showing you, which is remarkable that we're talking about that. Weather Service, thinks it could happen. A lot of the local broadcasters think it could happen down there. I think it could happen up here in the Jacksonville, Gainesville area. Jacksonville is, possible. Stark and Gainesville is pretty conditional to less likely here. Again, maybe flurries, but that'd be the extent of it. I think. I mean, dusting, I guess, but nobody around Stark and Gainesville. I can't imagine getting anywhere close to a 1/2 inch. That'd be stunning. But as we're looking and as we're tracking things here, it's a very unusual forecast. It's, not preparing for a hurricane. We're talking about fun topics here, meteorologically here overall. Got to be careful up in the Carolinas because it will be windy, though, with this snow. So, even though for our area, definitely not preparing for anything like a hurricane or, really, in, any of our Georgia counties. If you're looking over South Carolina, North Carolina, there's a chance this could end up being classified a blizzard up there. So, but for our area, this is not like a tropical cyclone's coming. I don't think we're going to have any winter storm warnings in our area here. Maybe some winter weather advisories. I know that's hard to say quick there, but winter weather advisories maybe in southeast Georgia possibility, and then maybe around the Tampa Bay area. But, we'd be lucky to get some flurries squeezed out on the first coast and the like. But it's going to be very chilly, and that's a big deal. We have a big marathon Sunday morning there, the Donna Marathon, and it's going to be, tricky with that cold weather. I know the runners do like it. Pretty cold here as we're looking and as we're tracking things. But it's gonna be, about as cold as you ever have for a run here toward our area. So again, just something to be mindful of. You know, just something to very much pay attention to. I know there were considerations about that. I don't know if they actually ran it then. Let me double check this because I know in '93 they had the Storm of the Century. They had the Gate River run that weekend schedule. I can't remember if they actually, I mean, I wasn't around then, but reading about it, hearing about it, can't remember if they actually ran it then or not, if they pushed it off. They put, apparently, just looking real quick, it looked like it got pushed back a day for that run in '93 with the Storm of the Century. This is not the Storm of the Century, though. It's going to be a big blizzard, a big deal. Some areas in the Carolinas are going to get their biggest snow they've had in a while up there. But again, this is just showing this over and over to you here. If you want to make a trip here Saturday, be careful, of course. But you do see, I mean, some of our areas near I-75 may get some flurries, like, you saw up there as we're looking right there, maybe around Tipton, give or take, some flurries. But you see where more of that kind of might stick there, be around Jessup, which is just north of our covered area there. As we're looking, you have Waycross, where we could have some of that coming in, but probably Brunswick, again, be a little more likely there, maybe over toward Nahana, somewhere in there. So, but, just an interesting situation here as we keep looping that around over and over because, I think this is a very important look at things here as this is the most reliable guidance that we can say for our local area. Again, a little bit less reliable, but, it's the overall idea really makes a lot of sense here down toward the south. Later Saturday is what I'm about to show you. So let me go ahead and jump back on over here. And again, this is Saturday night, and this is a chance for accumulating snow in, west central Florida. Still not a guarantee by any stretch. We're talking about Florida snow. It's not a guarantee, but look at this. This is on Land of Lakes there, Wesley Chapel, areas there around Odessa, Florida, around Lutz there could have some snow. But don't get your hopes up. I mean, but this is something, it's really aggressive with it. Plant City, Mulberry, Bartow maybe getting some snow. Not all these places will probably get it. So again, don't get your hopes up. But I think somebody in here will get a half-inch of snow, which is crazy to talk about, as we're tracking. This is probably a little too far inland with this, but maybe Kissimmee and St. Cloud get some flurries out of this. But I think this fetch right in here, as we're looking, it's coming right off the Gulf, just like it would come off of a lake there for Buffalo. Granted, not anything like the type of snow they get in terms of the amounts, but just kind of trains in a little bit. Again, remember that 5/100th of an inch of rain would in precip, in that, way of thinking, equate to a half inch of snow. So, again, you're looking there, Wiki Watsy and some of these areas down here that we never, ever, ever saw this for. If you see something like this, a crazy model, people completely discount. But this idea really seems to, be something that would probably come into play. Again, I think the coverage would be a little bit less, but I think the totals here, some areas, the idea of it coming in the same areas over and over again is a good idea in terms of the models, thinking of it. I agree with that. And again, I think somebody's getting a half inch of snow out of this in west central Florida, somewhere in the Tampa Bay television market area. So somewhere in there, I know, I think it's kind of, maybe you think it's far-fetched, but that's what I'm seeing here right now. I don't know if it's going to go as far as the Fort Myers market. That seems a little bit on the edge there, but as we're looking here, somebody in this zone. So there you have Citrus County, you have Hernando County, you have Pasco County, you have Hillsborough, you have Pinellas, you have Polk in there, and somewhere in that corridor, somebody's probably getting, especially the coastal ones from Citrus through Hernando, Pasco, Hillsborough, and Pinellas. Somebody in there. I just have that feeling based on looking at these models and this pattern. You have the warmer Gulf. It's not that warm, but you have the warmer temperatures out there. The cooler land, you have that wind, and just the way this is setting up just perfectly to get this effect here, like you do with lake effect snow around Buffalo. The idea is, similar, not the amounts. But it's just the idea that I think somebody's going to really see something down there. Okay, we talked enough about that because the cold's going to be, dangerous cold, potentially deadly here even for our local area. So that is something to touch on. Let's switch back on over to the, let's see here. So February 1st, we're seeing all this cold come in here, and let me go ahead and let me switch something up real quick here. Make sure I get this in here properly. So Sunday morning, we're starting to see that cold, and then let me just pull this up. So Sunday morning temperatures. This is probably a little too high with some of these. Yeah, this is a little bit better probably, but you see all these similar colors. I mean, this indicates low 20s around Stark and maybe upper teens. Jacksonville, similar story there. That's the thing. It's not, the rural areas. It's everybody getting that pipe bursting weather in a whole cover zone. I mean, as we're looking, you see teens, more widespread making to far northern counties. You see in central Florida, though, mid-20s around Orlando. That's pipe bursting weather. Lakeland, mid to upper 20s there. As we're looking, you have Tampa there, low 30s there. It's a little warmer because of the Gulf and that influence of the wind direction we talked about on the West Coast down there, but that's going to actually that effect, and that difference is in part because of the pattern that's allowing that potential Gulf, affect snow. Gulf of America, Gulf of Mexico affects snow, which is remarkable. I mean, look at all these lows. We're going to have maybe 20s all the way down there, south of Lake Okeechobee in some spots. Clewiston could be in the 20s down there. We're going to have falling iguanas all over the place because they're cold stunned. And you're going to have, unfortunately, crops that could, depending on what protection can be taken, they're going to get lost, though, in Central Florida because it's going to be so chilly. Some of the coldest air Central Florida has seen maybe, in recorded history, give or take, or at least going back decades. Once in terms of arrival and some of the coldest air in decades down there in Central Florida. We're pretty much similar to what we had back on the Christmas period of 22, but before that, you have to go back to about 2010 or so for some of the coldest. But the wind chills weren't quite this bad at night. But we had these minimums around, from what I can remember, and just these wind chills. I mean, just crazy cold wind chills here Sunday morning as we're looking and as we're tracking things. So, okay, let's go ahead and see the graphic here about all this. So that hard-free danger there is going to protect people, pets, plants, and pipes. Damage and low air temperatures here as we're looking at things, as we're tracking things. I know dangerously cold for our entire area. Long duration below freezing adds to the impact. And then you just got to use extreme caution with space heaters. There's that fire risk. And again, I had single digit, maybe now I'm seeing probably about 10-degree wind chill, numbers at the Northeast Florida beaches Sunday morning, but single digits in our inland areas, including Stark, and some areas could get as low as 6 on that feel like number there. With that feel like number, because the winds will be so high, gusting there, very high as we're looking at things. I mean, when you're looking and tracking things here, and they're just kind of looking at the data here, we're talking about those winds gusting, about 30 miles an hour, even, into the night there. And that's, it might start to kind of, wane a little bit by the morning there on that Sunday, but Saturday night, it's going to be wild with those type of wind chills around here, though, because the winds are going to be so high. That could, even cause, just a little bit of damage in terms of some, a tree limb, something getting knocked down here or there. So I'm talking about gusts about 25 miles an hour there as we're looking toward Sunday morning, give or take here, instead of those 30 gusts. But that's just going to put that wind chill really, really low as we're looking. Sustained winds of about 15 miles an hour here inland, with gusts to 25 Sunday morning, after having, sustained winds close to 20 with gusts to 30 Saturday evening. So that's some strong wind with these extreme cold temperatures. You don't see that hardly ever around here. That strong a wind with that much of cold, but it's because of the low. Then north we have that extreme cold watch in play. I know we have, some freeze concerns, extreme cold watch, more about the wind chill, but, we have that extreme cold watch getting all the way down state here, folks. We're talking about all the way down through West Palm. I know West Palm Beach, so we're talking about an extreme cold watch down there. The criteria a little bit different, based on, historical, comparisons, but they could have a freeze in West Palm Beach area at least, as we're looking right at it Saturday night, which that's very rare for them to get below 32 in West Palm. So just barely getting above 50 down there on Sunday. That's very unusual down there as we're looking and tracking things again. Some of the coldest air you'll ever see here in some of these areas downstate as we're looking and tracking things. And then, even down toward Miami, we're talking about a situation there where, they're going to be right around that freezing point, maybe just above it, but in the afternoon on Sunday, barely getting in the 50s with gusty winds. So that's just tells that weather story. But in our area, still some of the coldest air we've seen in a while, with the wind chill factor, some of the coldest in a really long time. In some of our counties with these winds being this strong and it being this cold and mixing all the way through the area, causing those pipes to burst here if you don't take precaution as we're looking and as we're tracking things. So you got to take this very seriously. I know as we're just giving you guys the very latest. I know just showing you guys the precip types. Our local area, maybe a little sleet in there, but we'll have rain and then we'll have the potential for that snow as we talked about. Probably not freezing rain. Maybe black ice is a little different. I guess in theory you could have a little bit of that moisture left, but that shouldn't might be left over for Sunday morning with that generally for our area. Maybe there's still some of that snow on the ground in our far northern eastern fringes of southeast Georgia. And then down toward Tampa, they might have a little bit still on the ground if they get enough. Like we've talked about somewhere in that corridor. Not everywhere. A lot of spots where I get it, but there'll be a corridor. I think a little, little spot where we could get a crazy amount for Western Florida standards of up to a half inch of snow there Sunday, early Sunday, late Saturday. So as we go ahead and say here, chances for at least snow flurries. This isn't talking about accumulation, just the idea. Granted, I think it would be probably accumulation, maybe, possible up toward the Brunswick area there, up to a dusting or so, as we talked about. But, maybe a little bit more if if it didn't set up the right way, but as we've alluded to, but pretty high chance of that around Brunswick in our area. That's the only area I always see a high chance. If you want to see, pretty much to guarantee yourself accumulating snow, probably want to go about Jessup or maybe even a little bit further up where they have the watch and play. There was like stage for 1 to 4 inches anticipated by the National Weather Service up in that area. So you have 50% chance of flurries toward Albany. Probably wouldn't amount to much there, but it could happen. 50% about Augusta, 60% Waycrest, 60% Jacksonville, but probably, not amounting to a whole bunch. Maybe a little bit better chance because of the banding on the backside of the low. And the pattern here, Tallahassee, that's kind of unusual. The lowest chance of anybody in our area here for flurries on that Saturday. It's not really favorable for them, probably. Swanee River Valley, 40% chance. Gainesville, 40%. Palm Coast, 40% chance. But then down toward Cedar Key, it's actually 50 because of that Gulf effect that we've talked about. And it's even higher if you get down south of our area. Yeah, going south of our area, we have, except for Brunswick and, if you were down toward, if I did percentages for like some of those counties down there, Hernando County, Pasco, probably more like 70% chance, in that area, somebody in that vicinity getting them. So as we're looking, except for Brunswick, you pretty much have higher chances south, but that'd be all, pretty much at night. So if you're traveling, maybe late, right before sunset, you have it right after sunrise, that potential. That sounds crazy, and it almost makes me think it's not going to happen for that long of a period, but as we're looking here, but it's a situation where kids have a little on the ground when the sun comes up, but the bulk of that would be in the dark, so it'd be more fun for people actually, at home and the like, being able to step out and see it versus, having to be kind of on the road for it, which can, if it did, eventually get the surface temperature down to 32, you could have some problems with that in theory if it amounted to overachieve and, got on the roads like that. So we'll see, but again, let's see something else here. I put this together. I was hoping I'd have a little bit higher chances for Bradford. I don't have 40% of flurries. So don't get your hopes up here in Bradford, but we could get flurries. We had that tiny snow flurry period for a couple minutes last January. If we get it, I hope it's better than that. That was about, we were looking and looking and, and keep in mind this graphic's a little tricky because, we were looking for that last year, I'm sure, and if go back in history, you're not going to have consistency here on this directly. So some of the lower end events, you just don't have radar. Nobody's going to be at it. Maybe in the middle of the night, some year 60 years ago or something, looking for flurries. But, but my point is we had a little bit then, a little bit more in 2010. That's a similar pattern in some ways in terms of the cold air mass type storyline for the area. the winter weather pattern in terms of the snow, it's not the same by any means, but just in terms of the cold, some of those numbers arrival in that period there. Then in 1989, we had a dusting of snow, a part of a historic system that was, the Jacksonville snow event. They got a good bit for a white Christmas. George Winterland, he wrote about that. Like George Winterland did, and back in '77. Here in Bradford County, at least a half inch measured in State Road 100. I have a picture of that more in a moment. Some of that's in the background here, what I'm going to allude to on that here in a moment, but I've shown that to you before. But in '73, there, February, there was some flurries reported. In 58, February, in 1958 in February, we had enough to make snowballs in spots, according to reports and like from the Bradford Telegraph. And then February 1899, estimated 2 inches fell in Stark there. That was a cold weather outbreak. That's where you have some of the cold records in terms of temperatures come from all time at February 1899 event. So it can't happen here. It doesn't happen much. I mean, there's only 4 of these that are real notable because 89, 77, 58, and 1899. Those are the 4 that really enough to get good photos out of. There are actually photos if you look on the internet. I said it years ago. I don't necessarily have it right off. Now I probably could find it, but it took me a while. But there are photos on the internet of the 1899 snow in Stark, of the downtown area, way back then being covered. I have photos from '77. The Telegraph had photos from '89. If you look in the archives, I know University of Florida has the archive of just tons of old Bradford County telegraphs. And in '58, enough to make those snowballs and spots there. That information coming from the Bradford County Telegraph as well. Look into the archives. They go back many, many, many decades, that archive does. So something to check out over there if you have time and you're interested in Bradford County history. But as we're looking here and tracking things, I know this is what we had last year. If you're up north, you're laughing. I mean, little tiny white dots. It was snow, but it's about it. It's snow grains, tiny snow flurries for a couple minutes there on the backside. But we had a half foot in Albany. We had this year around Stark. It was nothing pretty much, but it is enough to count in my book. And then as we look through in '77, my family did have plenty, plenty of snow here before I was around. Down in Hampton, this was something. I know down around Tampa, but last time they really got, good amounts of snow. So, for them, it might rival this event because, but here, this is one where we had at least a half inch on State Road 100, but this looks like it may have been a little bit more than that, especially those, those footprints, maybe. It just depends on how deep those were. If, can't tell exactly from this, but I know the snowdrifts, I believe, you had more than that, or at least the wind kind of blowing things around there in '77, as I recall, looking back at that. So, Stark is in Bradford County, probably not going to get anything like this on Saturday. We may get flurries. That's very much possible. That one model showed a little bit of that, and the most aggressive solution, for just a short period, it's possible. But something like this, maybe Brunswick gets this and gets lucky. You got to be careful still, of course. You see the car pretty much covered in that there. Looks like I hadn't really looked at that truck in the back, but it looks like it has some on it too there on that first photo. But as you look, Jessup, Georgia, pretty good chance of this ultimately, and then maybe somebody around West Central Florida gets lucky and gets something like this here as we're looking and as we're tracking this, which would be a remarkable story and one of the bigger Florida weather events, in terms of this novelty factor. This event in '77 is where Miami got some flurries, by the way. Not expecting that here, but back in '77, that event really, in terms of novelty factor, is one of the bigger weather events of the century. Novelty, the fun factor on it, the oddness of it, and maybe we have that for Tampa area and West Central Florida, or Pasco, Hernando counties there. Maybe Citrus, but Pasco, Hernando, Pinellas, Hillsborough, that vicinity, as we're looking and as we're tracking things here, as we give you guys the very latest. So it's very, very interesting to talk about, obviously. I know we have all this cold air coming on in here, just remarkable under the wind direction. We had ocean effect snow back, when I was at FSU around Jacksonville. We had that, and it was because of the wind coming the opposite way off the water. This would probably, be a little bit more consistent. It wasn't quite as cold then as it's going to be now in the overall air mass in the region. But just kind of interesting to touch on that here as well. That idea has happened in Florida before. It happened in Jacksonville about a decade ago or so. Again, these are old family photos from '77. Again, Bradford County. Maybe we'll get real lucky. I hope so, but I'm not expecting this on Saturday here in Bradford County. That'd be stunning if we got it to this level here. I say up to a dusting. That would be, certain spots have a better chance of that than others. Maybe Fernandina Beach, believe it or not, might have a better chance of this. I just don't see this here in Bradford. We maybe get some flurries we can get video of here. Maybe we overachieve. I know the kids want to see it, but maybe we'll get a little bit of it. But to this level here in Bradford seems unlikely. But other areas a different story, obviously, as I've alluded to. Now we do have a potentially blizzard type situation up north, which is crazy to talk about, quite honestly. At least it's not as bad as ice, but it can still be deadly and very, very serious, obviously. And we still have so many outages with power from the ice storm. This won't cause as many, but because it's about snow here. Some of the areas could get over half foot of snow. They don't get them, that often here in the Carolinas, as we're looking and as we're tracking things, as we're giving you guys the very latest on the situation, something to be mindful of, for sure, with this winter weather situation, something to be very mindful of as we're giving you guys the very latest here. I know, just trying to keep you informed on all this, and then a winter storm warning around the Charlotte area. We're talking about, some pretty good accumulations of possibility there. So, Mecklenburg County and the likes. So that's something to kind of be mindful of. For sure, you have that coastal flooding potential, which is not fun, obviously, because of all that wind around. And just got to be very mindful of that as we're giving you guys the very latest on things here in the overall meteorological pattern. Let me, see that side of the storm system here real quick. Let me go ahead and get our H-triple-R up for that. Because, we're talking about our area, but we have other areas to the north that we have to talk about too. As we give you guys the very latest on all this. I know, this is showing you the end of the run, but let me go ahead and take that off just for a second, and I'll back that up. As we look here, as we track, we started to get some of that to come into the picture there early on that Saturday. You see all that snow coming on in. That's something to be mindful of, obviously. Maybe some gusty winds in there. And, definitely something. It's not an ice storm, sure, but still can be very impactful with all that wind. Blizzard, like maybe blizzard, officially blizzard conditions ultimately up there. As we give you guys the very latest on all this. A very active winter weather pattern for sure. As we're tracking things. And then we have our precip forecast. This didn't just talk about rain, it's talking about all sorts of precip, including snow. Of course, we talked about this. Sometimes the snow, sometimes the equivalents can be a little different. Maybe this event up to the Carolinas, maybe more, instead of a 10-to-1 ratio, you're talking about, maybe in the high end 20-to-1, but 15-to-1 ratio, something like that. So instead of, you have maybe 5/100ths there of an inch of rain, that gets you a half inch of snow. So let's say if you had 1 inch of rain, that gives you 10 inches. Maybe that gives you 15 inches in the theory. Now, this isn't exactly what this is showing now. So you see a half inch of precip around Raleigh. This goes for the whole period. I haven't looked at everything. There's other precip chances in here, but half inch of precip would say, maybe it's a situation here where you have that's 5 inches, but in a typical event, but this could be higher because of the overall weather pattern. So again, but not all this is snow by any means. Some of this is just rain, something mixed. So it's kind of this time of year, unlike the rest of the year, and especially in this pattern where it's so cold. This gets a little confusing here, as we're looking and as we're tracking things. But not a lot of precip around North Florida, South Georgia in the days, weeks to come. We have that drought concern still. We're so busy we haven't had time to put that in here, but the drought monitor. But it's not exactly a good picture there with that. We got to be very, very, much thinking about that in the months to come. And be alert for those drought conditions, maybe, worsening here if we don't get enough precip. So as we go ahead and see it now, let me go ahead and see our area. Bradford, that's where we're at. 62 different counties we're watching things for. Not expecting any severe weather, in the days to come now. But winter weather, yeah, we're watching it. we'll have updates here and, streams as necessary. And then as you see here, extended forecast, you see a 65 today. If you want to get outside, I know we have a little bit of that rain chance, a little more than what I had before. I had 50%, I dropped it to 40. But if you want to get outside today, is maybe the day with the warmer temperatures. 65 is not warm for us, but for what we've had, that's pretty warm. But this is going to be bone chilling cold for the weekend there. As we're looking, you see how cold in the 40s for the highs. And some of that on Saturdays earlier in the day at times. That's why I went a little higher. But then I had at 45 and now at 47. But wind chills is at 6 degrees there. That feel like temperature because of the wind up on Sunday morning there. And Saturday night, low of around 19 in general there. And then even the beaches are not going to be that much off of that because of it. That wind mixing things. On that Monday there, you see up to 53 degrees. As we're giving you guys the latest. And then on that Tuesday there, 59 degrees, warming on up a little bit, but it's still going to be cold. 26 in the morning. You have on that Wednesday there, you have it warming up some more to 65. You have 40% chance of rain there. You have 50% on that Thursday. Starting to get more precip in there right now for area. It looks like all liquid. As we look on that, it's not something you are used to saying, having to say that, but the way things have gone lately, right now that looks like all liquid. Doesn't look like a whole bunch yet, but maybe we'll get more in there because that would help with drought concerns a little bit. But again, we're way, way down in terms of those rain and precip totals. We need a lot more to make things up, and we're going to have concerns with that. Unfortunately, I know there's prescribed burns and the like, because of this concern to try to mitigate that risk ahead of time. But the wildfire concern in the weeks and months ahead. But right now we're focused on that historic local cold, potentially historic. I mean, in Central Florida, even more so, probably, but even in North Florida, the wind chills are going to be bone chilling. We don't generally get wind chills that low in the single digits around here because the wind can be up so much. 19 we can get sometimes in the rural areas. We got 18 here not that long ago, but it's, we got 18 other spots in the cities got a bit warmer than that. And this time with the wind, it's not going to be the case. So we've got the same, maybe a degree warmer, but they're going to be 5-10 degrees colder than what they had that morning 2 weeks ago. From this morning where we're at now on this Friday, but, back, it's just going to be so cold. As we're looking and as we're tracking things in all the cities, right in downtowns where pipes, you haven't been tested like this in a while. Gonna be bursting here, even in the major metros, because in the beaches you don't get this type of cold in the low 20s very often, upper teens. A few spots, even at the beaches here, the Northeast Florida beaches, because of the overall pattern. That's gonna be problematic here, and that's gonna cause pipes to burst. So you gotta take precautions: plants, pets, pipes. People, pools. Remember, practice fire safety as well, because you can have, unfortunately, people running those space heaters is so cold, and then if you have fabric within a few feet of it, that can catch fire. If they flip over, see have somehow have a little bit of a draft coming in. I don't, maybe not too many houses, but if you have a window open somehow, or it's cracked a little bit, you don't know it, and it's enough to knock that space heater over, and it catches your house on fire or something like that. That's an awful, awful situation, and that can be deadly, a deadly house fire potentially, which is very, very tragic. So we got to be very mindful of that here. As we're looking and as we're tracking things, it's temperature, not that much warmer than this for Sunday in Central Florida, which, historical wise makes it even more rare. But, for our area, this is pretty rare as well. So, especially that wind chill factor Sunday morning, feeling like the single digits for many of us, feeling like 10 degrees at the coast. For that marathon, the Donna Marathon there, Sunday morning is going to be, so cold at the beaches there. I know the runners, some of them like that, but that's got to think, the spectators probably don't like that one bit, and that could be pretty dangerous for them as we're looking and as we're tracking things. So something to kind of keep in mind here as we're looking and as we're tracking things, as we give you guys the very latest on the weather situation. So again, just be very mindful of all that as we give you guys the latest updates here on this historic cold. We're in alert mode. We're going to keep an eye on the snow potential here that we've alluded to as we have that extreme cold watch in play here. I'm just checking to see if we've upgraded anything yet. The weather service, in our area, I don't think so. But we have that extreme cold as minimum wind chill feels like temperatures 5 to 10 degrees Fahrenheit Protect people, pets, plants, pipes here. Very, very important. Our whole area with that concern. So the beaches, you're saying, oh, I'm normally warmer. I don't normally freeze. You're going to freeze if you're in our area Sunday morning, it would seem, and probably even have a hard freeze, which can damage those pipes, cause them to burst. Got to protect your plants. You got to protect your pets, people. Obviously, you got to be being, having those pools protected there. Those going to have problems. You got to practice fire safety because you could have house fire. Even now, I mean, it's 29 here east to start. This cold pattern is, some chilly air, but going to be as cold as you'll ever see around here pretty much Sunday morning. I know the all-time record low, so not the coldest ever, but I believe that off the top of my head, the all-time record low is like 7-8 degrees around here in our neck of the woods here in north central and northeast Florida. All-time record low. I'll just check it real quick because I'm right here at the computer. For Jacksonville, it is okay. Okay, yeah, 7. That's what I was thinking here. And I think Gainesville might be 8. These are in 1985. Let me double check. Okay, 6 in 1899, but I think they might have got to 8 in 1985 as well. So something like that there. As we're looking at, as we're tracking things. So not quite to that, but those wind chills will feel like that as we're looking at, as we're tracking things. So still gonna have problems with pipes for sure. If you got down to 8 or 6, and that'd be even a good bit more problems because the insulation required to protect those would be even more significant. But this is still very cold for us here, very, very low as we're looking here. And the all-time record low in Orlando, they're going to be in the mid-20s. Their all-time record low is only 19, so they're not that far off from their all-time coldest ever. All that wind, this pattern pushing things south. So that's something that's even more, more rare, that cold air mass to get that far south in central Florida, to be quite honest with you. So again, something to be very mindful of here. Just something to keep you guys updated on here in the Weather Center about for sure as we're looking at things and as we're tracking things. So just something to kind of be out, monitoring here. But in some cases, you have to do even more than that here as we're looking at things and tracking things here. We're just trying to keep you guys informed here on the weather situation. So again, that's pretty much all we need to say there. I know our latest History Report, extended run, should be coming out now. I'll just say this one more time, what we have in here already. In the system all prepared for it to sow. A little bit neater look at the loop of it than normal, and you can just see how we have southeast Georgia getting that potential here of snow, looking pretty likely. And, some other areas it's more possible than likely. And this setting so up, but we said, on the other model, the NAM, I know we don't normally use that one anymore, but it's really, and the idea makes a lot of sense with the Gulf effect snow toward west central Florida. It's pretty likely for some of those Tampa areas, not everybody, but some of those areas in that Tampa Bay television market probably going to get snow Saturday more after dark into the early morning. Then you could actually see a lot of this, up until sun sets at about 6 o'clock. So, after 6, you can be a lot harder to see things, but, some of this is in the afternoon, so that's something to be very much mindful of. So, that's the storyline there as we're giving you guys the very latest as we're looking at things and as we're tracking things. I hope you have a great night. Have a great weekend, but we'll probably be popping back in here in the days ahead with more updates, streams, and the like on this weather situation. And again, stay safe, stay warm, bundle up. The kids at the bus stop need to wear those jackets. Very chilly air. Got to be careful. Sometimes you're not thinking when it's so cold. You got to just try to, be vigilant here with these cold conditions. I know up north, we think about people having to shovel snow too in the Carolinas. That can ultimately lead to people in a hurry doing that or overdoing it can lead to heart problems here. So something to keep in mind of that way. But again, we'll keep our eyes on everything here and be back here in the days ahead as conditions warrant. For now, meteorologist Casey Cloud here in the Weather Center. Stay warm, bundle up, everybody.